Hey, everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes podcast. This week, Microsoft is cutting thousands of jobs as it reshapes parts of its business. Claude's much hyped return of Fable is frustrating users, and T-Mobile's battle with Broadcom shows just how difficult it can be to escape VMware. We'll cover the latest layoffs, AI backlash, and enterprise IT shakeups, plus major security vulnerabilities, high profile data breaches, new backup and recovery solutions from Microsoft, and much more. Stay tuned for that. First up, Yahoo have reported that Microsoft announced on Monday that they were eliminating approximately 4,800 positions, which is about 2.1% of their global workforce. And this is as Microsoft shifts resources towards high priority growth areas. When I was researching for last week's episode of the podcast, the rumor was circulating about these layoffs, and the rumor was that it would mostly impact sales and those in the Xbox division, which does seem to carry some weight now that the announcement is kind of out there now. The gaming division's new head, Asha Sharma, said last month that their business needed a reset and that its profit margin had declined to 3%, forcing a restructuring that could include potential layoffs. At a higher view, last week Microsoft had a frontier company announcement about their commercial business, with the division embedding engineering experts directly alongside clients to speed up tech deployments. So there was already that kind of restructuring announcement in regard to that. And then also in the Xbox division, restructuring was previously announced for long-term success, which includes spinning off 4 of the gaming studios to new management in an effort to preserve their ongoing projects and IP. Impacted employees will reportedly receive severance packages and career resources. However, Microsoft has also cautioned that further changes are on the horizon for other business units. The layoffs will not be confined to just one region either, like, for example, Redmond. In Ireland, as another example, Microsoft notified the Irish government of layoffs, and this must be done when 30 or more full-time employees are being let go from an organization. So it seems like at least 30 employees in Ireland are going to be let go, presumably even more because Ireland has quite a large Microsoft presence. Unfortunately, there's probably going to be some uncertainty. Of course, you can go to the layoff.com, which you kind of have to take with a pinch of salt because they're, anonymous sources, although I believe they're anonymous and some verified. So, you could take their word for it, but there's also a lot of speculation on that site from time to time. Regardless, it's very unfortunate that these layoffs continue to occur in tech, and sadly, I think it's not going to stop anytime soon. Bleepingcomputer.com and frankly, pretty much every tech outlet in the world and most mainstream media in the world reported that Claude Fable relaunched last week. And while the initial launch was met with fanfare and a surge in examples being published of full games that were created using the model, web apps, and more, this relaunch has been met with kind of mixed emotions and dismay. On Reddit, for example, users are reporting that the restored Fable 5 feels weaker or is simply being routed through stricter safety systems more often than before. One user wrote, quote, "The new guardrails are kicking in on way too many tasks and failing back to Opus 4.8. This is not the model that got banned." End quote. And the problem is not just limited to Claude Desktop, as Claude Code is also struggling with similar issues, with one user saying that, quote, "Fable didn't even let me search for dead code without switching to Opus," while another said it was very obvious when the fallback triggers because Claude tells the user and visibly shifts to Opus. Another developer claimed that the model was unusable for some systems-level coding work, saying that C, C++, Rust, Win32 API references, memory-related work, and files mentioning words like security, vulnerable, unsafe, or hook appear to trigger a fallback or a block. Fable 5 may still be powerful when it actually handles the task, but the restored version appears to be far more sensitive to prompts, project files, and security adjacent language. The term nerfed is being thrown around in regards to this release. However, BluePcomputer.com understands that the model itself has not been nerfed. Instead, it's likely just that Anthropic is being extra careful with the safety guardrails, which is negatively affecting Fable's daily use cases. And it's funny that so many people are complaining that it's basically failing over or defaulting back to Opus 4.8. But as people started to get Fable again this time, and they started complaining and saying that Opus 4.8 was better. So it's funny how, the perception was, oh, this sucks. Opus 4.8 is better, but the reality seems to be that Fable is actually just failing over to Opus 4.8. So uh, perhaps not a true reflection of the performance. Maybe a little bit more emotion from people than actual fact, I guess. Although it must be very frustrating if certain trigger words are maybe failing over and just not doing what you would expect. Anthropic says that Claude Fable 5 will not be accessible via cloud subscriptions after July 7th. So if you haven't tried it yet, you might want to hurry on. But they did say that this is not a permanent change, and they expect that the model will return outside of usage based plans soon. The move is due to high demand, and plans to move the model to usage based billing next week is because of that demand. Anthropic said, quote, for Pro, Max, Team, and Select Enterprise plans, Fable 5 will be included for up to 50% of weekly usage limits through July 7th, after which it will be available via usage credits, end quote. A Claude Code lead engineer has clarified that Fable is expected to return to subscriptions once Anthropic has enough capacity to deal with the demand. Late last week, Reuters reported that Google lost their long-running fight against a record EU antitrust fine for using their Android mobile operating system to block rivals. This court ruling is seen as likely to boost Europe's crackdown on big tech, and the fine leveled was around 4.1 billion euros, and that was recently reduced to just a couple of years ago from even more. The court sided with the EU antitrust enforcer, with the judge saying, quote, the appeal brought by Google and its parent company Alphabet against the judgment of the General Court is dismissed, thereby confirming the penalty imposed for Google Search's abuse of a dominant position in the context of the Android operating system, end quote. A Google spokesperson said that the judgment failed to take into account its investment to ensure Android remains open, interoperable, and free, with the representative saying, quote, in any event, we adapted our agreements to comply with the initial decision back in 2018, and we remain focused on continued innovation and openness for our users, partners, and developers, end quote. Google has racked up close to 11 billion euros in EU fines in the last decade for various antitrust infringements. While the record antitrust fine is less than 3% of Alphabet's annual profit, the loss could embolden other regulators and companies to chase Google for damages, according to Reuters. Just last week, a Swedish court ordered Google to pay about $1.5 billion in damages to PriceRunner, a price comparison business now owned by Klarna, and it suggested that more fines look likely in the near future for Google for allegedly favoring their own services and products in search results and for practices related to its App Store, both of which fall under the Digital Markets Act, aimed at reining in the power of big tech. Ubiquiti has released security updates to patch 7 critical vulnerabilities in UniFi OS, including a maximum severity flaw tracked as CVE-2026-50746 that could be exploited in command injection attacks, according to BluePcomputer.com. CVE-2026-50746 affects UniFi Connect application versions 3.4.16 and earlier. a management software suite that Ubiquiti customers can use to automate and manage commercial building operations, including smart LED lighting systems and electric vehicle chargers via a single interface. About this vulnerability, Ubiquiti explained, quote, a malicious actor with access to the network could exploit an improper access control vulnerability found in UniFi Connect application to execute a command injection on the host device, end quote. Ubiquiti advised users to update the impacted UniFi Connect app to version 3.4.20 or later to secure their systems against potential attacks. And it is yet to be confirmed if any of the vulnerabilities, the 7 vulnerabilities in total that have been patched now, have been exploited in attacks yet or not. This is just one vulnerability that I've talked about in regards to the Connect application. However, remember, there are 6 others. So, it's a good reason to patch. There are many vulnerabilities, UniFi systems and the OS and everything that goes with networking solutions tend to be low-hanging fruit for cyber criminals. So stay on top of patches. And I covered it as a tip before, but if you have these kinds of systems in your home network, this is one of the cases or examples where it's probably a good idea to enable auto updates. Yes, it might suck if your network goes down when an update occurs, but it's better than you forgetting to update something and falling prey to cyber criminals. Microsoft Entra Backup and Recovery is now generally available. Microsoft Entra Backup and Recovery automatically backs up core directory objects daily in Entra. Supported objects include users, groups, applications, service principals, managed identities, conditional access policies, named locations, and authentication and authorization policy, helping administrators return their environment to a previously known good state. Microsoft Entra customers licensed for Entra ID P1 or P2 now can restore supported critical identity data after accidental changes or malicious updates, and this is all rolling out to all workforce tenants this week. And Microsoft has provided some best practices for those to consider who are managing Entra ID. Sleepycomputer.com has reported that Microsoft are saying that the Windows Settings Backup and Restore tool will be enabled by default on Microsoft Entra joined or Entra hybrid joined enterprise systems after upgrading to Windows 11 26H2. This backup tool helps backup and restore enterprise users' Windows settings after a device is reset, replaced, upgraded, or re-imaged. The Windows Backup default on behavior will only apply to devices that run Windows 11 26H2 from countries or regions not regulated by the EU Digital Markets Act or DMA, that aren't in sovereign or restricted cloud environments, and that have the backup policy not configured. On systems where the tool is enabled by default, IT admins will still retain full control via mobile device management solutions, and admins who want to explicitly disable the backup policy can do so through Intune or group policy, as these will take precedence over the default. Additionally, the restore behavior will not be enabled by default, and users will still need explicit admin configuration to restore Windows devices. As stated, this is going to be on by default in 26H2 for those in certain regions. So if you'd like to check it out now for yourself, you can through the Windows Insider Program experimental channel starting this month. Carrying on in the same vein, Microsoft has also announced its Cloud Rebuild feature, which is a tool that can remotely trigger a complete system reinstall from the cloud for Windows 11 devices experiencing persistent problems or that have become inoperable, is now under testing. In a statement in the Windows Insider Communications, Stephen Lyons said, quote, "We're introducing Cloud Rebuild, a new recovery option that restores a Windows 11 PC to a clean, known good state by performing a full OS reinstall, even when Windows won't reboot. Unlike Reset This PC, Cloud Rebuild downloads both the target Windows image and the device's drivers from Windows Update, so the device comes back fully functional without USB media, without a custom image, and without depending on the health of the currently installed OS." End quote. Windows insiders who want to test Cloud Rebuild must first install Windows 11 Insider Experimental Preview Build 26300.8772 and then start the recovery process by clicking Cloud Rebuild in the Windows recovery environment under Troubleshoot, Recovery, and then finally uninstall. A couple of quick hit stories now. AppVentix 5.2 is now available, and they say this version builds upon their biggest release ever. This release introduces support for Azure Blob Storage and the use of Azure Artifact Signing. Admins will also be delighted to see the new Workspace Analyzer feature that shows you what app setting or policy will be applied just at a glance. And there has also been several improvements to their AppV and MSIX delivery too. Nutanix also announced something new. Nutanix has announced a new C# SDK, and they've published several samples on their GitHub repositories for customers who want to lean on that for getting started. TechRadar.com recently reported that hackers have used previously leaked credentials to target Microsoft 365 accounts in a password spraying attack that resulted in over 81 million login attempts during a 2-week period. The attackers abused the improperly implemented conditional access policies within the resource owner password credentials OAuth mechanism using Azure command line interface, allowing hackers to bypass authentication altogether when a matching username and password was discovered. Cybersecurity company Huntress observed the attack campaign as it targeted customers and noted that 78 Microsoft accounts across 64 organizations were compromised between June 12th and 26th of this year. Several of the organizations that were breached did not enforce MFA at all, with others only applying MFA for specific user groups such as administrators. In other cases, a login attempt only required MFA when the traffic was coming from an untrusted location, meaning that MFA was not enforced if the connection was coming from a trusted IP address. Additionally, some organizations had only enforced MFA in report-only mode, meaning that the MFA policies were never actually applied. In order to protect against attacks of this kind, Huntress recommends MFA for all users, all cloud apps, and all client app types. The Azure CLI application should also be restricted from use by non-admin users, and response to an attack should be made on credential validity rather than spray volume. Healthcare device manufacturer Medtronic is notifying affected customers about a data breach that exposed their personal data to an unauthorized third party, according to bleepyourcomputer.com. The company previously confirmed that its IT systems were compromised by hackers, and the infamous data extortion group Shiny Hunters claimed the attack. The threat actors said that they were holding 9 million Medtronic records with internal corporate data. From April 13th to April 19th of this year, an unauthorized actor had accessed certain Medtronic corporate IT systems, and the exposed data may include full names, contact information, date of birth, social security number, and health-related information. Shiny Hunters typically publishes stolen data if ransom negotiations with the victim organization fail to secure a payment. The hackers listed Medtronic on their dark web extortion portal on April 18th and threatened to release the stolen data, allegedly over 9 million records, if ransom payment wasn't made by April 21st. However, the Medtronic entry was reportedly removed from Shiny Hunter's listing later that month. In the notification to customers, Medtronic emphasizes that the stolen data was not exposed online. So it's interesting because the story suggests that following the MO of Shiny Hunters, it suggests that no payment was made. However, they pulled it off their sites. So, was it paid? Was it not? Who knows? Can merely speculate, and I suppose we shouldn't be doing that. Accenture has confirmed it suffered a security breach after a threat actor claimed to have stolen 35 gigs of source code and other data from the company. Accenture told bleepycomputer.com, quote, "We are aware of this isolated matter, and we have remediated its source. There is no impact to Accenture operations and service delivery," end quote. According to the threat actor, the data includes source code, RSA keys, SSH keys, Azure personal access tokens, Azure storage access keys, and configuration files. To support their claims, the threat actors shared a screenshot that appears to show them cloning an Azure DevOps repository named 121123 underscore Atreus Talent Academy that was hosted under a redacted Accenture.com hostname. BleepyComputer.com could not independently verify the full scope of the data being stolen. And while Accenture confirmed the breach, they did not comment on the threat actors' claims regarding the amount or type of data that may have been accessed or exfiltrated. This would be a really good time for Accenture to come forward and just share exactly what they know. It seems like they're holding their cards a little close to their chest, based on at least what BleepyComputer.com is reporting. BleepyComputer.com has reported that the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA as I typically refer to them, warned last Wednesday that attackers have begun exploiting a high-severity SharePoint remote code execution vulnerability. This one's tracked as CVE-2026-45659. And this security flaw stems from a deserialization of untrusted data weakness, and it allows attackers with low privileges to execute arbitrary code on unpatched SharePoint servers in low complexity attacks that do not require user interaction. Microsoft's advisory stated, quote, any authenticated attacker could trigger this vulnerability. It does not require admin or other elevated privileges. In a network-based attack, an authenticated attacker who has a minimum of site member permissions could execute code remotely on the SharePoint server. End quote. It goes on to explain that the attack vector is network because this vulnerability is remotely exploitable and can be exploited from the internet. The attack complexity is low because an attacker does not require significant prior knowledge of the system and can achieve repeatable success with the payload against the vulnerable component. Microsoft released security updates for SharePoint Enterprise Server 2016, SharePoint Server 2019, and SharePoint Server Subscription Edition to address the vulnerability back on May 21st, saying that the CVE had been accidentally omitted from the May 2026 security updates. So if you took the 2026 updates from May, you may not be patched against this. You'll want to take that May 21st update that was released. BleepyComputer.com has reported that BeyondTrust are warning customers to patch two critical security flaws in their remote support and privileged remote access software that could allow attackers to bypass authentication. The first vulnerability, tracked as CVE-2026-40138, affects the company's RS Remote Desktop and Assistance platform, and that's versions 25.3.2 or earlier, and the PRA Enterprise Cybersecurity Solutions versions 25.3.2 or earlier. The vulnerability stems from an improper authentication weakness in the authentication subsystem, and successful exploitation enables attackers without privileges to bypass access controls and access targeted appliances, including accounts with elevated privileges. The second vulnerability is CVE-2026-40139, and this stems from improper processing of BeyondTrust RS authentication requests, enabling unauthenticated remote attackers to gain unauthorized access to vulnerable instances. In both cases, BeyondTrust noted that exploitation also requires a specific authentication configuration to be enabled, but it did not share further details. BeyondTrust has also released security updates for two high-severity security issues, CVE-2026-40140 and CVE-2026-40141, and these could be exploited to trigger denial of service or access restricted resources on unpatched RS and PRA instances as well. BleepyComputer.com warns that despite BeyondTrust not suggesting that these two vulnerabilities are being exploited in attacks in the wild at the moment, other BeyondTrust flaws have been used in the past for exploits, so it is best to patch. So, on previous episodes of the podcast, I covered high-profile cases brought by Tesco and AT&T against Broadcom over VMware product licensing and support disputes that have occurred over the last couple of years since the acquisition of VMware by Broadcom. Well, T-Mobile has now entered the chat. According to Ars Technica, T-Mobile is asking a New York court to rule that Broadcom was contractually obligated to continue supporting its VMware perpetual licenses. In its complaint, T-Mobile said it has tens of thousands of virtual machines using VMware software across approximately 303,140 CPU cores. It also said that it was migrating off of VMware, but noted the time-consuming and technical challenges involved in migrating over 1,000 applications, which this is interesting because Tesco had also mentioned the difficulty in migrating, but they're taking a very aggressive approach in trying to expedite their migration away. The mobile company, T-Mobile, claimed that in 2023, it bought perpetual VMware licenses plus 2 years of support with the option to buy a third year. But after Broadcom bought VMware, it stopped sales of VMware perpetual licenses in favor of subscriptions and started bundling VMware products into a few more expensive bundles. When T-Mobile tried to extend support for a third year for over $5 million, Broadcom would not allow it on August 2025, according to the court filing. A Broadcom representative reportedly told T-Mobile via email, quote, Broadcom announced end of availability of all perpetual products, which includes stated out-year renewals for perpetual support, end quote. A judge has granted T-Mobile an injunction that allowed it to receive support services from October 2025 through August 3, 2026 for the $5.2 million, plus the posting of a $500,000 undertaking. Now, T-Mobile seeks a declaration that it was entitled to renew support services and further relief as the court deems necessary. At one point, T-Mobile wanted support so badly that it offered $20 million for 2 years of software updates and support services. The company cited litigation costs and mitigating interruption and security risks to both the network and the business as part of their reasoning. In a filing last month, Broadcom claimed that it has incurred $24 million in costs to provide T-Mobile with support for 6 VMware products and to assign it 3 dedicated support account managers. T-Mobile responded that it doesn't use 3 of the 6 named products and has opened only 2 service cases this year, so one of them is lying. Broadcom previously argued that T-Mobile's case stands out because T-Mobile waited a long time before trying to extend support. So I think that's in contrast to others like Tesco and AT&T. A Broadcom lawyer said back in October 2025 that thousands upon thousands have successfully migrated to subscription. T-Mobile is the outlier here that is in litigation. Thousands upon thousands of customers have already transferred under these sorts of provisions and accepted and understood that end of availability applies. Sure, but those companies were just not willing to push back, whereas it seems like at least T-Mobile, AT&T, Tesco, and some others are willing to push back. At least that's the way I read into this. NeoWin.net has been publishing a series about potentially unknown things about Windows 95. And recently they featured an article about the fact that in Windows 95, the OS would detect installers simply by guessing. That is, if a file contained the word setup or install, for example, Windows assumed that it was an installer and it would appear as if it was an installer within Explorer and be handled as though it was an installer. Now, I knew this, and I feel like this practice of guessing what an installer was based off of name is something that went way beyond Windows 95. So it's probably not news to everyone, but if you want to check out the series for yourself, go to neowin.net and search Windows 95. Finally, in the news for this week, I want to give a big shout out and congratulations to the man, the legend, Jeremy Moskowitz, who recently announced that he has left his full-time role at Netwrix. Jeremy, of course, sold PolicyPack, which he founded in 2009, to Netwrix back in 2021, and has been working full-time with Netwrix ever since. Jeremy is now entering what he's calling a mentor-builder phase and says that he will be working with entrepreneurs, sharing what he learned about starting, building, scaling, and selling a company. He also indicated that he would be building new things again, new projects, and he will share more information with us in future. Jeremy has been a great support to me personally and of this podcast over the years. It's fair for me to say that without his support, this podcast would have ended up like 90+% of podcasts, just in a heap and dead in short order. So if you enjoy this podcast, then you have Jeremy to thank. So best of luck, Jeremy. But now, this episode's scripts, tricks, and tips. First up, one of my favorite resources because I work in application management is Silent Install HQ, and that's been a website that has been invaluable to the community for many years. Well, Silent Install HQ now has an app, and it makes searching and finding the applications that you want to get the silent install strings for a lot easier. So check that out at app.silentinstallhq.com. And don't worry, I'll share a link to it with this episode, which is episode 447. And you'll find that at 5bytespodcast.com or in the description of the YouTube edition of this episode. And finally, I saw that neowin.net had a tip for those worried about the MV2 extensions being disabled in Chrome, and particularly the loss of the uBlock origin extension. And their tip is simply use Brave. So I covered this on multiple episodes of the podcast. uBlock Origin seems to be the one MV2 extension that's getting a lot of the attention in terms of the disabling of these extensions. And you might recall that the disabling of those types of extensions is something that Google has delayed over the last few years, but it is coming now. So people are concerned with losing that functionality, and probably rightly. Neowin.net suggests using an alternative browser like Brave that has more, I guess, security, not even just security, but blocking invasive things more in mind. So check out Brave if you haven't already. But that's it for this episode of the podcast. I apologize for any audio issues. I had to do it. I was going to say I made the mistake. I didn't have a choice. I had to move my setup to another PC, and I was having all kinds of problems with my microphone on this new PC, and I couldn't figure it out for the life of me because it would work fine in one type of software, in another type of software, but then in Adobe Podcasts, it was having problems. And then I found that it seemed to just be with the connection through the browser. So if I just tried other browser sessions, it started to work again. It was really frustrating, but I apologize for the quality this week. Hopefully, we'll be back to normal next week. Thanks for listening.